If you're building AI automations of any kind, at some point a client or a user will need to interact with your workflow. And honestly, right now, the options are very limited. So today we're going to build a custom expense approval UI that connects with an n8n workflow without using any of the native n8n forms. Let me show you how it works. You start the workflow in n8n and it waits for the webhook, and then the UI will trigger the workflow. The workflow processes some data and sends it to a human to approve. So as you can see, this displayed on the page, and I can either approve or reject. Let's say I reject, and the workflow will continue from that point and process the decision and then show the user the status of the processing. The UI uses a simple technique that was first presented by a friend of mine at the n8n Amsterdam meetup. Sharif analyzed over 1,600 n8n workflows and noticed two things. The first is that no native forms were used in any of those workflows. And the second is that most human interaction with n8n workflows happen via email or messaging apps. But they really happen through custom interfaces that can display data and business logic visually so that everyone can see what's happening in real time and can request changes quickly. The technique has three building blocks. Number one is the execution ID. So every workflow run gets a unique ID the moment it starts, and that ID is your unique handle that your front end knows exactly how to interact with which workflow. Number two is the wait node. So this is the node that lets n8n pause mid-execution and hold the state indefinitely until something external tells that workflow to continue. And the third is the front end that makes HTTP calls to the workflow. In this case, it makes two of them, one to start the workflow and get a unique ID back, and one to send the human decision back to the workflow and resume it. And that's the whole interface. That's what we'll be working with today. So I'm going to start with a blank n8n workflow here, and I'm using a local installation of n8n, but you can use self-hosted or web-hosted. It's up to you. So I'm going to start with adding a webhook node, and I'm going to change the method to post. And I'm going to change the path here to approval UI. And I'm going to leave the authentication as none for now, but I'm going to change this to respond using the webhook node. And that's my first node. Then I'm going to assume that when the user starts this workflow via the web UI, some processing will happen, and I'm just going to use a set node here to kind of like hardcode that processing. So basically, I'm going to add an amount for the processing for the expense report, and I'm going to use a random expression. And that's all you need for this node right here. So you get a webhook call, you edit some fields, and then you respond. You send basically that data back to the web interface to process it. So I'm going to add a respond to webhook node. And instead of responding with first incoming item, I'm going to specify a JSON field, a JSON body, and I'm going to create those four fields, basically the amount, which comes from the previous execution, the submitted by the description, and an execution ID. So that execution ID is basically my handle for communicating with the UI. First thing, I want to make sure this works before going forward and without building any UI. So I'm going to go here and copy this webhook URL, and I'm going to execute the workflow. And then I'm going to switch to Postman, and I'm going to change the method to post, and then I'm going to paste the URL here and send the request. And as you can see, the request got back from the workflow, the execution ID, the amount, submitted by, and description. So my workflow is working, and now I can get back to creating the following node. And the next node is where the real magic happens. So I'm going to add a wait node. And most people add wait node and resume after a specific amount of time. But this one, we're going to change to resume on webhook call, and no authentication, and we're going to use a post method. And we're going to respond with a respond to webhook node. That's pretty much it. So I'm assuming the user will respond with approval or disapproval. So I need an if node to process the request. And basically, I'm assuming I'm going to get a approved JSON response from my UI, my web UI. So I'm going to create an expression here, and I'm going to give it the JSON body approved parameter here. And in this case, I'm just going to set a local variable. And then similarly, I'm going to create a second one here. And the status will be rejected. And then this is basically a placeholder for any processing that you'll be making on this stage. And then I'm going to create a merge node, basically to respond, to merge these two fields, the outputs from these two nodes, and then respond to the UI with a decision. And similar to the first respond to webhook node that we created, you'll be responding with JSON. And basically, you will be sending the status that you processed. You processed from the previous merge node. So basically, the user is shown some data. The workflow will wait for the user to process the data, and then the workflow will continue. And based on the user decision, the workflow will perform more steps and then send the final status update to the user to see in the UI. So before building any UI, I want to make sure this workflow works properly. So I'm going to fire up Postman again, and I'm going to execute the workflow and send a post request to get the execution ID. And I got this one, 234, and it's waiting at the wait node here. So I'm going to go and grab this URL from the wait node, which is the URL that your UI will be posting to after it gets the execution ID. And as you can see, it ends with the execution ID here. And I'm going to make a post request, and let's say approved equals false. So this one should move the workflow through this path. And if I send this, it goes here and it says rejected. And if I want to try again with a different decision, let's send this. It's 235. Put here 235 and make this true. And it's approved. So my workflow works, and now I need to build the UI for it. I'm not going to build the interface step by step here. I'm going to show you quickly, walk through the files that I have created, and I'm making those files in the workflow JSON file available in the comments for you to download. So basically, it's a simple HTML page that has a button for starting the workflow, a section that gets displayed once the workflow starts, and then a section that gets displayed once you receive the final approval status from the workflow after processing the user input. A simple CSS file here. And then the app.js, it has a bunch of definitions in the beginning. I'm not going to show because it has my webhook URL and my API key, but you need to get those from your n8n installation and add them to this file. And then it has basically two functions. One that starts the workflow, and when it starts, it displays the data from n8n into the second section of the page. And then once the user sends the decision, it's going to wait and show basically a status message whether it received approval or rejection. So I'm going to run this using a live server extension because it allows you to make post requests without having to enable cores on your n8n if you don't want to. So for testing purposes for today, this is good enough, but in more advanced videos in the future, I'm going to show you how to set up cores properly so you don't need to set up live server. Okay, let's test the UI now with the workflow. So I'm going to start the workflow manually, but there is no reason why you shouldn't publish it once it's working and avoid hitting that button every time. And then start workflow. It executes, waits at the wait node, asks me for input. If I reject, it goes through the right path and shows the status update. And if I refresh this and start the workflow again, and if I approve this time, it goes to the right path again and it shows approval. But I want to be straight with you about what we didn't cover here, because there are real gaps between what we just built and something that you can actually ship to an actual client. Let me show you exactly what I mean. every time your workflow runs, n8n assigns the next number in sequence, like 178, 179, and so on. And if someone intercepts one of your execution IDs and they know the URL that you're posting to, or even just guess the next one or enumerate them, they can post to your resume URL on the wait node and send the decision to a workflow that isn't theirs and potentially get data back. So they can take action and get data, which is a serious problem. There is a fix, and it involves adding a layer of kind of indirection so that the client never sees the real execution ID ever. The implementation matters a lot here because if you get it slightly wrong, you end up with a false sense of security, which is actually worse than knowing your URL is exposed. There are also other ways your UI can interact with n8n. What we built today is the one on the left. One input, two outcomes, the user decides, and the workflow routes the decision, and that's it. Now, template 2 is more of a data input form where the user submits something, and n8n has to actually do work before it can respond. Maybe it's an AI step, maybe database write operation, or could be 3 seconds or 30 seconds. The UI logic here is fundamentally different because you need a loading state while n8n processes the request, and you need to handle the cases where it takes longer than expected. And you also need to render a dynamic result, not just approval or rejection. And then template 3 is an actual dashboard, no user input at all. It's just a UI that watches a long-running workflow move through different steps and shows progress in real time. That needs a completely different kind of like architecture because now you're not waiting for one wait node, you're tracking movement across multiple nodes over time. And the front-end logic to handle that looks nothing like we wrote today. So I'm going to be tackling these different use cases in the next video, so make sure you subscribe and you like this video, and feel free to leave any comments with questions you have, and you can download the project files in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.